Joining us now is Dr. Dean Hart. He's an expert in microbiology. He's published author on the transmission of viruses and diseases. He is with us now. He's also taught as an associate research scientist as a professor at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. So he comes here to our show very well respected, and he's been very patient. Dr. Dean Hart, thank you, sir, for being with us.
Good morning.
So, Dr. Hart, I want to ask about the virus, but first I'm going to get to how we get past where we are. The president says, here's a metric, Easter Sunday, I want to get things back to normal. And other experts are saying we have to bend the curve. And I ask the same question to everybody who comes on. What is the metric for bend the curve? What does that mean? What is the percent? Is there a numerical percentage of cases every day that is going to indicate to us that the curve has been bent?
Okay, we have a history of studying diseases over decades, and we can predict the outcomes and risk-reward ratios. There's a paucity of information for this novel coronavirus because it just happened in the last few months. Nobody's ever seen it, gotten it. Half a year ago, nobody had gotten it, seen it, heard of it. It's out of nowhere. Nobody has immunities, and it's very contagious. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Coronavirus doesn't discriminate.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the ultimate answer is a vaccine. However, vaccines, to avoid unintended consequences, we typically test them, and it takes a year or two to develop a good vaccine. Hopefully, it's faster, but don't count on it. Then you have the most reasonable approach to get rid of this social distancing. We have to be able to test everybody. We have to test people not in the hundreds of thousands like Vice President Pence says we got a few 100,000 tests. We need 1 billion tests. We need to be able to test people regularly all the time and figure out who's a carrier and who isn't, who's got the germs, who's suffering from coronavirus as opposed to allergies. Doctors can do a good job, but not a perfect, flawless job whatsoever when it comes to something novel that there's no history about.
The balance here, and President Trump has said this now for several days, that as the president, there's got to be a balance between sequester and quarantine everybody, and nobody has a job, and the economy dies, and people are starving, and they're out of work, and there's suicides and stress and heart attacks and strokes and all the things that we saw that went with the 08-09 collapse of the economy. So what is that balance, sir, in your judgment?
Well, you could add in a lot of domestic violence as reported in New York because you're with your wife and your kids all the time. So there's all sorts of, this is worse than that in the sense of lack of socializations. Most of the people thrive and prosper on socializing, and that eliminating this through this activity, it's just a horrible treatment. But until we have the testing ability to test the mass population, I don't know where you're going to get a number that we can open by April, whatever, for Easter. We need some way to know who's going to get people sick and who isn't, who's safe, who's not safe. We can take a guess. Pretty much those that got the disease and recovered, they're safe, we believe. Now, those that are elderly and high risk, they're most endangered, and then everything in between. But if we don't have the tests, we can't protect our society. And yes, there is a balance, obviously, between work and public health, but my job is public health more than worrying about the work.
All right, so Dr. Hart, let's say everybody had a test. I guess what I'm struggling with is I don't have symptoms. I'm not going to get a test. There'd be no reason for me to waste time doing that when somebody else has symptoms. So I don't have any symptoms. Why should I have to get a test?
Well,
how does that make sense?
This test is non-invasive. So a carrier is going to get people sick. There's a story of Typhoid Mary in the old days. There's all sorts of carriers throughout history for a disease that don't get the disease. We don't need a test. We need regular testing until we get this pandemic under control. We need many tests for everybody for, I don't know, I couldn't say it's a week or a month, but we have to have millions upon millions of tests so that we can finally isolate the people that are sick or carriers, and then we can stop transmitting this disease.
Okay, but the flaw in what you're saying, Dr. Hart, and I'm not, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from here. So let's take me, for example. I'm a 62-year-old male, smoker in the past, although I did stop a while back, about a decade ago. Pretty good health. I don't have any signs. So I go tomorrow and I take a test, and my test comes back negative. Great, right? So now I'm negative, so I'm fine. So I go about my business. I go to work, and 2 days later, I'm at the grocery store, and I catch it, but I don't know. So I've already been tested negative, but now I have it. Now I'm a carrier. I'm still not sick. I have no symptoms, so I don't go get a second test. Would everybody have to test themselves every day?
Well, if we could afford to test ourselves in the morning, every day, in the comfort of our own home, like a pregnancy test, if we could do that, that would really be a great thing for this coronavirus. But that's all theoretical because we don't have any kind of test like that. They're talking about 45-minute tests, something that you can do yourself, perhaps. Yes, this would solve a lot of the problem. We don't have the technology, so a 62-year-old without symptoms isn't going to get a test. We don't have enough tests. Healthcare workers with symptoms always get tests. People that are 62, just because you used to smoke cigarettes, you're not getting a test no matter how much you want it. They don't exist for you. So the thing is that if we get an abundance of tests, we can really be scientifically get this under control. And hopefully it would be in the comfort of our own home that we could do with ourselves so we can get each other's citizens back, protect each other from this coronavirus. This little coronavirus, you realize this thing is, the diameter of it is smaller than the wavelength of visible light. But it's so contagious. Measles, they say, is one of the most contagious. This one may be up there with the measles as a very contagious virus, and we have to. It is much more deadly than the flu virus. It's a very deadly thing compared to the flu or other things that we've had in the past, and we have to control. And the only way to control it is know who can give it to everybody.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. I'm with Dr. Dean Hart. He's an expert in microbiology. He's a published author on the transmission of viruses and diseases, and he is also, for a quarter of a century, I don't want to date you, Dr. Hart, because that sounds like a long time, a quarter century,
yeah,
Dr. Hart.
I'm 62 like you.
You're in the prime of your life, man. 62, baby.
Chicken. Yeah.
You and I are spring chickens, right? 62. I feel great at 62. For 25 years, Dr. Hart taught as an associate research scientist and assistant professor at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. So he's got a pretty good resume, and he's 62 years young. All right, Dr. Hart, let me just ask you this. So right now, the mortality rate is, right now, with the number of tests that we've had, is 1.5%. As testing goes up, and the number of people who have the virus go up dramatically, we expect that the mortality rate will go down to under 1%, probably 0.07. That's what I think Korea has, something of that nature. So my question is, if we get to under 1%, that means that 99% of people in America who get the virus are going to recover in 1 to 3 weeks.
Well, we got to speak relatively. When we look at the flu, you have 0.1%. In the best case scenario, I've seen as low as 0.7% mortality. I've seen as high as 4%.
Right.
So we don't have the numbers again, which is driving everybody crazy. But if you have 7 times mortality for the coronavirus than the flu, you know how you feel about the mortality rate of the flu. Now multiply it by 7, and that can't be better.
Well, then let me ask you this. The percentage of, let's say we get to 0.7%, 0.8%. Also, and I had this debate with Steve Bannon the other day, much to his chagrin. I said, well, of that percentage, right now it's about 1.5%. 97% of those that are dying are seniors over the age of 68 with other compromised health issues. So when you start extrapolating it down to under 68 and people without compromised health, the numbers start to look like the flu. Help me understand why that's not a logical argument.
Well, because I'm not sure your statistics are correct. I'm not so sure that 45 and 55-year-olds, it seems to me in the statistics, they die much more so with the coronavirus than the flu. 68-year-olds, 78-year-olds, now every life is precious, but
right.
Let's face it, if they fall getting out of their car, they can die. So
right.
They're more delicate. The human body gets more delicate over time. So I'm not sure your statistics are correct for the group from 30-year-old to 65-year-old. I don't think it's as low as the flu by any stretch of the imagination.
All right,
but
well,
the numbers are still not in.
Yeah, the numbers aren't in, and that's, I guess, as we get additional tests, we'll see that. But so you really have no, when we say bend the curve, Dr. Hart, you really have no metric that you could give us that says, well, here's a percentage where I'm comfortable that restaurants can open, people can get back to work, understanding that, you know, some people are going to get sick and they're going to be off 1 to 3 weeks. I'm the average person that recovers based on what you've seen. Is that about, what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Walk us through that.
Most people, 80%, barely know they have it. They got a cold and maybe a cough and a sneeze, and they're curious, is it allergies or is it coronavirus? But typically, the allergies have no temperature or fever associated with them, and the coronavirus does, but colds have that. So, again, how do we bend the curve to the point where we're comfortable releasing everybody unto everybody else? To me, we have to have the knowledge of who can transmit and quarantine those people. Without that knowledge, the epidemiologists, the public health officials, all the people that specialize in this, and for 50 years they've been bored out of their mind. They want the numbers to crunch them so they can come out with a logical decision of at what point we can release everybody upon everybody else. And it's not in the skill set necessarily of a politician to figure this out. It's in the skill set of the scientists to gather the data and then tell the politicians this is a reasonable thing to do.
For the people that get the virus and recover, do they build up an immunity to get it the next time? So I get it, like, say I get it and I'm one of the 20% that actually, you know, have the symptoms. I have a fever, I have to stay home for 2 weeks, I have shortness of breath, but then, you know, 2 weeks go by, I get over it, I'm fine. And we understand if you get over it, there's no ramifications. Do you build up an immunity going forward, or can you just get it the next week again?
Well, virology is based upon the concept of all the vaccines are based upon building up an immunity. When you get the flu, you're pretty comfortable you're not going to get it again that season. But by the next season, you can get it. Now, we, again, hate to say it, the numbers aren't in. To me, so far, this is a virus like other viruses, more deadly, more contagious, perhaps, but it still makes sense. And we have reasonable comfort to assume this virus, if you get it, you're not getting it again for a whole bunch of time. Now, they're sequestering, they're taking plasma, blood, and they're separating plasma and taking the antibodies out of the plasma and injecting into sick people from the recovered patients, because we believe that will help. The antibodies will attack the antigen in the sick people from the blood of the recovered people. So we definitely have that theory and comfort that we believe the antibodies exist for a certain amount of time where you're not going to get sick again. So I wouldn't go out looking to get sick to get it over with on the one hand, and I wouldn't be positive you don't get a recurrence, but we haven't really seen with virus the behavior when you get better. 2 weeks later, you can get it again. It just doesn't make sense as a virologist.
Dr. Hart, we're out of time. I really want to thank you for coming on today and for your analysis. Dr. Dean Hart, expert in microbiology, is also taught as an associate research scientist and professor at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. Dr. Hart, thank you for being with us.
Hey, you're welcome.